Strap into your seats and get ready. It's time for the Mortarpod.
Hey everybody, Alex Stevenson from SeemsGoodMagic.com here. Welcome to this week's episode of the Mortarpod. The Mortarpod is a weekly podcast where I come up with and design a custom magic set based on movies, TV shows, and books, stuff from your guys' suggestions, and make a custom magic set out of it. So this week we're finishing off the Indiana Jones block, and I got a lot of feedback and help from Reddit and the YouTube community on these sets, and they were a lot of fun. So let's finish it off. If you don't know what the Raiders of the Lost Ark or the Temple of Doom rather, those sets, I recommend going to SeemsGoodMagic.com. Check out the podcast section, and you can see the videos for those as well. But if you're an audio listener, no problem. I'm going to be reading the cards to you and sort of describing how they relate to the movie. So I kind of purposely want each set to be, it's more important to me that they flavorfully, convey the movie more than them being super balanced or fitting into magic. I did try and balance these cards a lot, but I'm always going to be getting the feedback that this card's overpowered or this card's, and mostly overpowered stuff. So that's okay. I didn't intentionally do it, but I think people are right. There's probably a few cards that are overpowered, but let's move into it. It's a very artifact-centric set. We've already seen a couple mechanics from Raiders of the Lost Ark. We saw Archaeology X, and Archaeology X is so Archaeology and a number, and then the creature has the ability to tap and look at the top X cards of your library and pull out any artifact cards, reveal them, put them in your hand, and put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So Archaeology is a good way to dig for artifact cards in your deck. And then in Temple of Doom, we had Cult of Kali. If you remember Temple of Doom, there was that Indian cult that was in the bottom of Pankot Palace. And Cult of Kali is, at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control an artifact, you can pay black. And if you do, each opponent loses one life. So that was supposed to sort of evoke, because they had gathered the Sankara stones, and they were gathering power and becoming more powerful. And I believe their mission was to destroy all of the major religions of the earth. They wanted to go after Christianity and Islam and all of that. So finally, we've got The Last Crusade, which was really an amazing movie because it had Sean Connery. He did just a really amazing performance in that, and I really liked it. And it was, usually sequels sort of suck, and I think Temple of Doom caught some flack because it was so violent. People were kind of turned off by it, so Spielberg kind of got smart, reapproached the third movie in a way where he wasn't, it wasn't going to be so many violent overtones. It was just a lot of great acting, just an amazing movie. The fact that it was the third in a series and was still so good is really a testament to how amazing Spielberg and Lucas at least were at one time. I know there's a lot of Lucas hate nowadays, and I'm not going to be making a set for The Legend of Crystal Skull because I didn't enjoy that movie. I was kind of saddened by it, actually. I feel like it tarnished the other three. But, George Lucas, he's a good moneymaker, I guess. But let's jump into it. Let's go through all the cards here. We've got Cross of Coronado. Now, if you'll recall in the movie, the young Indiana Jones, played by River Phoenix, you sort of get this little background information on an artifact he steals from a group of people who've sort of been digging around in these tunnels and have come up with the Cross of Coronado. And the Cross of Coronado was supposedly something given to Cortez that I believe it had something to do with the crucifixion of Christ and something significantly related to that. So even the young Indiana Jones didn't want these people who dug it up to possess it. He believed it belonged in a museum. So the Cross of Coronado, the card is 4 mana legendary artifact. It's a mythic, and it's creatures your opponents control attack each turn if able. And then the flavor text is, it belongs in a museum, so do you. And that's once he's stolen it, and they sort of fast forward. The guy who stole it, who he stole it from, still is in possession of it. So the older Indiana Jones, now played by Harrison Ford, steals it back, and he fights the guy and eventually takes possession of the Cross of Coronado. So flavorfully, what I wanted was whoever's in possession of it seems to always have people attacking them to acquire it. So that was what I was thinking when I made Cross of Coronado. Next, we have Grail Diary, and you see that this is Henry Jones Sr., who's played by Sean Connery, his Grail Diary. Now, I was going to actually make this an artifact, and it probably would have worked maybe better as an artifact, but instead I made it an aura. So it's 1 in a blue aura. It's an enchant creature, and it has the mechanic from this set, which is called Relic Reward. So Relic Reward on Grail Diary is, you may pay an additional blue as you cast this spell if you control an artifact. If you do, draw a card. And then Grail Diary gives the enchanted creature Archaeology 1, so they can look at the top card of their library. It's an artifact card, reveal it, put it in your hand, otherwise put it on the bottom of your library. So Relic Reward, there's going to be a different reward for each color. Each color pays an additional color of that spell. And then if you control an artifact, you get some bonus. So the blue Relic Reward is draw a card. Next we have Henry Jones Sr. And he was pretty powerful. I did make him pretty powerful. He's 3 colorless, a white and 2 blue, for a 2/4 human advisor mythic. He has Archaeology 4, so you can look at the top 4 cards and reveal artifact cards. So he's almost like Arcanus the Omnipotent in that he can potentially draw you a ton of cards. And then in addition to that, he has, at the beginning of your upkeep, you may pay white and a blue, and if you do, you can put target artifact card from your graveyard on top of your library. So that's much like the land that escapes me now, but there is a land that lets you do the same thing. For 2 mana, put it on from your graveyard on top of your library. So I gave him that ability, which I thought kind of synergized well with his Archaeology. You could basically upkeep, put an artifact card on top of your library, then tap him, use Archaeology 4, draw that card, maybe some other artifacts at the same time. Henry Jones Sr. In the movie was kind of a bookworm. He wasn't much of a field archaeologist, but I still think he would have tremendously high archaeology skill. Because he was just so well traveled and he had spent his whole life sort of gathering information on the Holy Grail. So I figured he would be a very good archaeologist, much like his son. Next we have Walter Donovan, who's the main antagonist of the movie. And Walter Donovan's sort of like this rich millionaire in the 30s who basically has possession of a lot of antiquities and is a big collector of rare antiquities. And actually, he's done a lot of donations to the National Museum that Marcus Brody works at. So Indiana Jones actually knows Walter Donovan, but he doesn't realize that he's a bad guy at first. He thinks he's a friend. So Walter Donovan is a blue and a black for a 1/3 legendary human creature. He's also a mythic. He has tap, exchange control of another target non-land permanent you control, and target artifact an opponent controls with an equal or lesser converted mana cost. So a little bit of Puka's Mischief in that activated ability he's got. But instead of being able to just exchange control of any non-land permanents, you can choose any of your non-land permanents and steal artifacts, or trade artifacts rather. And I felt like for an artifact-centric block, that would still be a very powerful mechanic. Plus, he's very cheaply costed. So he's very efficiently costed, which would let you, be able to use that ability early on, which could be a big deal. And his flavor text is, "Didn't I warn you not to trust anybody, Dr. Jones?" And that's when Indy first realizes that he's been betrayed by Walter Donovan. Moving on, we've got Elsa Schneider. So she's the love interest for Indy in the movie. At least at first she is. But like Walter Donovan, she also is a traitor. She betrays Indy, and she was actually a Nazi spy. She's an archaeologist in Austria, because I read some background information on her. So because she works with the Nazi party and made her colors black and red, she actually ends up showing a little bit of compassion for both Indy and Henry Jones Sr. At the end. When Henry Jones gets shot by Donovan, she looks genuinely upset about it. So she does show some compassion, but I didn't want to mix white into her colors. I felt like black-red still represents her well. I mean, she did manipulate and betray Indy, so she's pretty dark. So 3 mana for a 2/3 legendary human. She's only a rare. She has Archaeology 2, and she has prevent all damage that would be dealt to Elsa Schneider by white and blue creatures. So flavorfully, Indy and Henry Jones Sr. Actually, Henry Jones Sr. knows that she's a traitor. But Indy doesn't know, so that's why she can't be damaged by him. Plus, even after she betrays him, Indy still doesn't want to hurt her. He still sort of has feelings for her. So that was what her ability is supposed to represent. Next, we have Ignite Petroleum. So after Indy first meets Elsa in Venice, they go to a converted church. It's been converted into a library. And underneath that is the sewers and the tomb of one of the knights of the First Crusade. And Indy needs some information from a shield, and inscripted on that shield from the knight in that tomb is information on the Grail's whereabouts. So what happens is a group called the Brothers of the Cruciform Sword are trying to keep the Holy Grail's location a secret. So they know that Indy and Elsa are going after it. So what they do is they light the sewers on fire. It turns out these sewers are just filled with petroleum, and they basically, it doesn't actually make sense because Indy's walking around with a torch down there, and just the smoke fumes from that torch would ignite all of that petroleum. But regardless, the guy comes down. One of the leader of the Brother of the Cruciform Sword, who I did make a card out of, you'll see him shortly, lights the entire sewers up in flames. So Ignite Petroleum is a sorcery that's supposed to evoke that part of the movie. And Ignite Petroleum is 1 red sorcery. It's a common. It has Relic Reward. You may pay an additional red as you cast a spell if you control an artifact. And if you do, target creature can't block this turn. And then Ignite Petroleum deals 1 damage to each creature without flying you don't control. So it's actually a little bit uncommon in red. Typically for 1 mana, red spells that deal damage, they deal damage to everything. But I liked Barrage of Boulders just dealing damage to your opponent's creatures, so I kind of wanted to do that again. And at a little bit cheaper cost, since Barrage of Boulders turned out to be, an okay playable card in Limited, but it's never going to see any constructed play. So I thought Ignite Petroleum might have a chance, since it can't deal damage to your opponent's flying creatures, but it can, eliminate a bunch of tokens for 1 mana. And still evoke, properly the flavor of the movie. So the Relic Reward is supposed to be, they control the artifact, so the creature can't block because they're, presumably putting themselves out if they're on fire or something like that. Moving on. Okay, so here's Kazim, Brother of the Cruciform Sword. So this is the leader of that secret organization that's trying to hide the whereabouts of the Holy Grail. It's actually Kazim, I believe, is how he says it in the movie. But he's 2 green for a 2/3 legendary human rogue creature. Since it's a secret organization, I thought he could be a rogue, and that would be okay. He has a relic reward for green, so you can pay an additional green as you cast it, and if you control an artifact, and if you do, you can destroy target artifact with converted mana cost 3 or less. So since it's an artifact-centric set, I didn't want it to be blow up any artifact. I thought 3 or less would at least limit it a little bit, but still be a very useful green relic reward. And Kazim, Brother of the Cruciform Sword, must be blocked if able. So he's actually a pretty powerful legend. 2 mana, 2/3, already efficient, and he must be blocked if able, so he can eat some 2/2s without dying. And if you pay 3 green, you can destroy an artifact with converted mana cost 3 or less, and still get a 2/3 that must be blocked. So a lot of good things. But when making legends, legends are actually a lot of fun to make because you can kind of push the envelope a little bit on power level, because they're legends, so you can never have more than one out on your side anyway. So that's kind of why I like designing legends. They're a lot of fun. Yeah, because you can, like I said, you can push the power a little bit, push the power level a little bit. Next we have Colonel Ernst Vogel. Now maybe you don't remember the name, but he's the sort of main Nazi who's conscripted by Hitler himself to carry out this mission to acquire the Holy Grail alongside Donovan. And Ernst Vogel is 1 colorless, a black and a red, because he's a Nazi, once again, as you can see from the picture, for a 3/2 first strike legendary human soldier. He's a rare, and whenever he deals combat damage to a player, that player sacrifices an artifact. And his flavor text is, "What are you hiding?" And he says that to Henry Jones Sr. after he captures him. Great acting by this guy. You really do love to hate this guy. He's pretty mean and dark, and definitely shows that the Nazis were not messing around. Some crazy dudes. So 3 mana, 3/2 first strike, very efficiently costed, good ability, and they really do want to block him because sacrifices in artifact is a pretty big deal. So pretty happy with how he turned out, since the sacrifices in artifacts is supposed to be like him stealing artifacts from people after he, attacks them. Next, we have the D-138 Zeppelin. So the D-138 was the actual Zeppelin used in the movie, which I thought was kind of cool. If you're interested in any of this information, there's an Indiana Jones wiki. There's like a wiki for everything nowadays. And I'm not talking about like Wikipedia. I'm talking about the Indiana Jones wiki. So they have like their own specific wiki. Gives you all sorts of really detailed information that you wouldn't remember at all otherwise. So that's where I get a lot of this information. It's very helpful. But the Zeppelin is Indy and his dad escape to a Zeppelin. And the Zeppelin is 4 mana artifact, and it has 4 and tap. Up to 2 target creatures you control gain flying until end of turn. And then the flavor text is, "Tickets, please." And Ernst Vogel actually gets on the Zeppelin to intercept Indy and his dad, but Indy ends up punching and knocking him off the Zeppelin, and they take off. But mid-flight with the Zeppelin, they start heading back to Germany. So I think Ernst Vogel makes some sort of call or radio signal to the Zeppelin to turn back. So they're forced to get on a plane that's on the Zeppelin. And since the second movie, Indy's learned how to fly planes, which I thought was kind of cool, that they've sort of showed some continuity there. He couldn't fly. He specifically could not fly in the second one, and now in the third one, he's learned to fly since being in that situation, that life or death situation where he couldn't before. So he flies around with his dad, and they end up in the Canyon of the Crescent Moon, which is one of the locations where they're getting closer to the Holy Grail. Because Donovan and Elsa have betrayed Indy and stolen the Grail Diary, they also know to go to the Canyon of the Crescent Moon. So this is sort of where they encounter Donovan and the Nazis. Donovan actually goes up to a rich Arab and negotiates, makes a trade of a Rolls Royce for a bunch, basically like an armed guard while they're there in that canyon. So what happens is the rich Arab wants the Rolls Royce, so he gives them soldiers and he gives them a tank, and this is a vintage World War I tank called a Mark 7 tank. And I think this is actually a fake tank for the time. The guns on it, they wouldn't have had the mounted gun, from what I understand. I recommend just looking up the Mark 7 tank because I'm not sure if it's a real tank or not. It sounded like it was based on a tank, but they sort of changed some features of it. But I did make the tank a card. So Mark 7 tank is an 8-mana artifact creature. It's a construct. It's a 6/7 trample for 8. It's an uncommon. And the flavor text on it is, "We're well out of range," and Indy is saying this, and then you hear a big explosion because the tank, I guess, was not out of range and fires a shot at them. So there's a lot of cool tank scenes in the movie, a lot of tank battles, and the Mark 7 tank was just a beast, just a huge tank. Moving on, we have a couple trap cards. So since the first set, Raiders of the Lost Ark and Temple of Doom, I had to have trap cards because we're talking about Indiana Jones here. So he's encountering traps in every single one of those movies. So in this one, it's no exception. We have the Breath of God trap, which I called the decapitation trap. Now, this is a very iconic scene in the movie where soldiers are trying to go and solve the puzzle because they're finally in the temple that houses the Holy Grail. But there's some big traps they have to get by. So the decapitation trap, the one clue in the Grail Diary is only the penitent man will pass. Now, Indy, being a pretty sharp guy, at least figures out what he has to do, which is duck at the last second underneath the blade. But what's funny is there's a blade that comes out of the ground too. So actually, even though it's only the penitent man will pass, so a penitent man is humble and will kneel before God is kind of what he comes to the conclusion of. But he ends up doing a forward roll too. So I don't understand exactly how that worked out. He knew to not only duck but do a forward roll at the last second. So Indy's good. He's got some nice reflexes. But the decapitation trap is 3 and 2 black. It's an instant trap card. All traps are instants. It's an uncommon. If an opponent has more life than you, you may pay 1 and a black instead of decapitation trap's mana cost, and then it's destroy target untapped creature. It can't be regenerated. So Asphyxiate is actually the first card I've seen that in black that destroys an untapped creature. Maybe the only card in Magic. There's probably more. But this, like, targeted untapped creature removal. Asphyxiate was also a sorcery. This is an instant, so I had to make it pretty expensive if you want to destroy an untapped creature, because instant speed destroying an untapped creature is much, much better than sorcery speed. So the theory on this one is if an opponent has more life than you, so basically they have to hit you in order for them to have more life than you, presumably. So if they've hit you, that creature is tapped until at least your next turn. So you won't be able to decapitation trap it on your turn. So that's sort of the idea I had in mind. Plus, if an opponent has more life than you, I was thinking that they wouldn't be as penitent. They're not as humble. You know, they maybe think they're better than you because they have more life. So that's why it would be cheaper. The next trap we have is the false floor trap. So once Indy's gotten past the blades, there's the floor, the word of God, also known as the name of God, and you have to spell Jehovah. And comically, Jehovah is spelled with an I, but Indy doesn't realize that at first. So he steps on J and goes straight through the floor. So the floor is set up in a way where if you step on some tiles, they break and you fall through. But if you properly spell Jehovah, then you can go right through. So the false floor trap is 3 and 2 blue, instant trap card, uncommon. If exactly one creature is attacking, you may pay blue instead of false floor trap's mana cost, and it's return all attacking creatures to their owner's hand. And then the flavor text is, only in the footsteps of God will he proceed. And that was the clue for this puzzle, this trap that Indy encounters. So in essence, it's if exactly one creature is attacking you, you can pay blue and bounce it. Otherwise, it's Aetherize for 5 mana. So I like the duality of this one, actually. It's a little bit more expensive than Aetherize, but at the same time, you could end up paying the 1 mana early on to protect yourself. So I was pretty happy with how this trap turned out. Moving on, we have the Path of God. Now, this is the final sort of puzzle. It's not a trap, but it's a puzzle. The final one that Indy has to do before reaching the the shrine that has the Holy Grail. So, Path of God is a 1 mana instant. It's a common. It has Relic Reward in white. You may pay an additional white as you cast a spell if you control an artifact. If you do, gain 3 life. And then target attacking creature gets +1/+1 and gains indestructible until end of turn. And then the flavor text is, only in the leap from the lion's head will he prove his worth. So it looks like when Indy gets there, it's just a solid cliff. There's nothing to walk on. But he has to basically take a step of faith, a leap of faith, if you will, which is already a Magic card, which is why I didn't call it Leap of Faith. But he has to take a step, and it turns out they've just designed some sort of stone path that looks identical to the rock wall. So my theory was, if you're brave enough to walk off, a cliff, then you get emboldened, you get more powerful, you get indestructible. And the Relic Reward in white maybe is the least interesting because it's just gain life, but gaining 3 life in some matches is very significant, like against any sort of aggressive strategy. Path of God's also a little more limited because you can only target an attacking creature, so you can't just make any creature indestructible, which I thought still made it worthy of being a common. So finally, Indy solves that. He moves through, he gets to the temple, and we encounter the Ancient Grail Guardian. I wanted to make this guy a legend, but he actually didn't have a name. He was just the Grail Guardian. And he's one of the brothers from the first Crusade who was basically, his mission, his quest, his job has been to sit there for hundreds of years waiting to give the Holy Grail final test, which is choose the correct Holy Grail. So Ancient Grail Guardian is 1 and a white for a 1/4 first strike vigilance. He also has Relic Reward white, so you can pay an additional white and gain 3 life if you control an artifact. So at full value, he would be 1 and 2 white, 1/4, gain 3 life, first strike vigilance, which is definitely very good. But even at 2 mana, 1/4, first strike vigilance, I feel like he's still pretty solid. Pretty awesome card. And I made him a 1/4 because he's actually weakened. He's even though he's immortal because he's drank from the Grail, he's still sort of weakened. I mean, 700 years, even if you're immortal, apparently does not make you completely ageless. So he's become weak in time over 700 years. Understandable. And he basically wants to pass on the job to Indy, who's totally not interested. But that's when they're interrupted by Donovan and Elsa, who come in, basically just following Indy, making Indy do all the legwork. So they get in there, and this is a cool scene where Donovan doesn't know which Grail it is. Elsa and Indy do, and Elsa tells Donovan, basically misleads him into taking the wrong Grail. So I made a card out of that. It's called Test of Knowledge. 1 blue sorcery. It's an uncommon. It has Relic Reward blue, so you can pay an additional blue, draw a card if you control an artifact. And then it's look at the top card of target opponent's library. You may choose to put that card into its owner's graveyard. If you don't, draw a card. So you basically, the best you can get out of Test of Knowledge is 2 blue. If you control an artifact, draw a card. So you'd get to draw a card, look at the top card of your opponent's library. You could choose to put it in the graveyard if it's a card you can't deal with. And if you do that, you don't get to draw a card. Or you could leave it on top if it's a card you can deal with, and then you get to draw a card. So at best, it's either draw 2 cards, look at the top card of your opponent's library, or draw 1 card, mill your opponent 1. So I didn't feel like it's overpowered, but at least one person said they thought it was overpowered. I don't think it is. I think it's actually a very cool card. It's almost like it's a Fate Seal potential. It's a Fate Seal sort of, except instead of putting it on the bottom, you can just choose to mill it or leave it on top. And then there's some card drawing, obviously, for blue. And it's cheap. I'm interested to see how much play it would actually get. Next, we have Deteriorate to Dust. So Elsa tricks Donovan, who drinks from the wrong Grail, and he starts rapidly aging because he's failed the test. And Deteriorate to Dust is the card that's supposed to sort of evoke that part of the movie. This is also another very iconic scene since it was very creepy. One colorless, a black and a green instant. Target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn. If that creature's controller controls an artifact, exile that creature instead. So you can weaken anybody, but if they've drank from the wrong grail, you exile them. You turn them to dust. And the flavor text is, "What is happening to me?" See, if I was Donovan and Elsa told me which grail to drink from, I would have made her drink from it first. That was kind of his mistake. He trusted her too much. But he ended up, he turns to dust, he dies. And you can tell that Elsa did it maliciously because there's actually, I remember this, he drinks from it and you see her face, it zooms in on her face when he starts, feeling like he's aging. And her face really shows that she knew that she had given him the wrong grail. Moving on. So we have the Holy Grail, finally. Indy, after watching Donovan turn to dust, correctly chooses the grail that was built by a carpenter. So it's a wood grail. And it's kind of the least attractive looking grail almost. But the knight tells him that he's chosen wisely. And the caveat of the Holy Grail, unfortunately, is you can't move it beyond the Great Seal of the temple. If you move it beyond the Great Seal of the temple, the entire temple collapses and you're no longer immortal. You're only immortal as long as you're in that temple behind the Great Seal. So the Holy Grail is not quite as what it was all worked up to be, the entire movie. But I did make it a very good legendary artifact. So it's 5 mana legendary artifact. Creatures you control have indestructible. If you attacked with a creature this turn, sacrifice Holy Grail at end of turn. And then the flavor text is, "The search for the cup of Christ is the search for the divine in all of us." So if you attacked with a creature is supposed to be you left the temple with the Grail, so you're no longer indestructible. But I like that you can have the Holy Grail and all of your guys are indestructible as long as you don't attack. And then even when you do attack, your creatures are still indestructible until the end of that turn. And then you have to sacrifice Holy Grail. I still think it's a pretty good legendary artifact. Final card in the set, we have Bottomless Chasm. So, of course, Elsa, being the greedy person she is, she wants to take the Grail and she moves it beyond the Great Seal. She doesn't even listen. She doesn't even listen to the knight. So the ground underneath the Great Seal splits, revealing this sort of bottomless pit. And the next card, the final card rather, is Bottomless Chasm. So it's really cool. I love it when there's like bottomless pit stuff in movies. It's always really creepy. But she's hanging on the edge where the ground has split underneath her. Indy is trying to save her, but the Grail was in her hand, but it sort of fell on a little... it's like just out of reach of her. It's on a little part of a cliff, like a little thing sticking out, a little piece of ground, the Grail sitting on it. She can't quite reach it, but she keeps trying and ends up falling because Indy can't hold her. Her hands are too slippery. So the Bottomless Chasm is 1 and a black. It's relic reward. You may pay an additional black as you cast a spell if you control an artifact. If you do, you get to put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. And then it's also target player sacrifices a creature. So at best, Bottomless Chasm is potentially a great card. It's at best, if you control an artifact, you can pay 1 and 2 black and kill a creature, put a -1/-1 counter on it, so kill an X1 creature, and then make them sacrifice another creature. Otherwise, you can weaken their biggest creature, and then maybe motivate them to sacrifice that creature. So it's got a little bit of duality to it. And then the flavor text is, I can reach it, but she never does. She falls through a bottomless pit and dies. And then after that, of course, they leave the temple. Actually, Indy gets in the same predicament Elsa's in and is being greedy as well. But Sean Connery, of course, calls him Indiana for the first time and says, let it go. So they've both let go of the Grail. They don't need it. I love that Sean Connery. It's kind of symbolic. He finally understands that his family is more important than this holy grail that he's been searching his whole life. It's just a cup to him. So I really like that. It's a good message. Love your family, more important than anything. And they get out of there and they ride off into the sunset. Literally, ride off into the sunset. Great movie. Awesome into a trilogy. Let's just pretend Legend of the Crystal Skull never came out. I hope you enjoyed that. This is a really fun block to construct. I don't know if I'm going to do full blocks for the future custom Magic sets again. I probably eventually will, but I might just do sets for a while again. But I hope you enjoyed that. Check out seemsgoodmagic.com. I'm up to 40 Cons of Tarkir drafts now. I've started doing some cubes as well. So hope you enjoy those, and thanks for the feedback. We'll see you next week, guys.